What up fam, welcome back to 88-Bit Tech. I'm AJ and today let's talk about getting the most out of your budget GPU and PC. There are a few things you can do to enhance your experience when playing your budget rigs, and I'm going to go over it. The obvious way to level up your gaming experience is to throw a lot more money at it. But what if that isn't an option? Well, that's where built-in upscalers come in handy. DLSS, FSR, XeSS, and their respective software suites can give your aging systems a second chance at life and look pretty good while doing it. But let's get into some games to see how to take our gaming experience even further. First off, let's go over our test bench for today's video. We've got the legendary RX 580 8GB 2048 SP from Soyo paired with the E5 2680 V4 CPU packing 14 cores and 28 threads, cooled by an Iwangu 4 copper heat pipe cooler with dual PWM fans on a Mogo X99 P4 motherboard. 16GB of DDR4 RAM at 2133 megatransfers per second in dual channel. We're running today's games off an XrayDisk 1TB Pro M.2 NVMe Gen 3x4 SSD, all powered by the C-tier Corsair CX550M 80 Plus bronze semi-modular power supply. Let's take a look at Helldivers 2. So the videos we have here are pre-recorded so we can get as close to the actual frames you'll see aside from the 1 to 3 FPS loss from high bitrate recording with AMD Relive. For our baseline settings, we have 47 average frames per second at 1080p native resolution on the low preset with high textures, since our GPU does have 8GB of VRAM. As you can tell by the footage, the game does look quite beautiful, even at these low settings for our budget PC, and I'd be more than happy to play with these results. However, we can do something to enhance our experience with little loss in frames, and that is with ReShade. ReShade is a software that you can download for free that gives you options to basically put a filter on your game to change how it looks. It can do things as wacky as giving your game a Borderlands cel-shaded look to simulating playing on an old CRT television for that nostalgic factor. It can be a bit daunting with all the features it has to offer, so let's simplify. If you go to nexusmods.com, which is basically a modding site for games, you can download presets that people have already made. And for Helldivers 2, there is a preset that levels up the game's graphics significantly, called Helldivers 2 NEMS HD ReShade preset. These filters can enhance the visual quality of the game and make for a more enjoyable experience, especially on low-end hardware. So let's take a look at a side-by-side comparison of how a filter can make for a better gaming experience overall. On the left, we have the before, and on the right, the after. If you look at the FPS, it's still averaging 45-ish FPS on 1080p low settings, high textures, but the image on the right looks far more detailed while maintaining similar FPS overall. Well, let's take it a step further now and enhance the actual performance. The game footage was captured on a 1080p 165Hz monitor, so let's see what we can do to get closer to that refresh rate. First up, we'll go into the game settings to use the built-in upscaler and change it to quality. And just like that, you can see the FPS jump. This will really help in keeping the 1% values up. Still, we're a far cry from 165 frames per second that our monitor can hit. While we could drop our resolution upscaler past quality, the hit we take to visual fidelity, in my opinion, is just too great, even with ReShade beautifying the game. So where do we go from here? This is where the Lossless Scaling app comes into play. Although not free, you can get this for $5 off of Steam on a discount, and it is well worth it as it can add frame generation to any game or video. It gets updated fairly regularly, and it just added X3 frame generation mode, tripling your FPS. There are some caveats with it. You need to run the game in borderless windowed mode or windowed, as it gets sketchy in full screen mode in some games. Also, locking your frame rate for the best experience is highly recommended. You can do that in-game if it has that option, or you can use RTSS from MSI Afterburner to do it. So how does it work? You'll first start your game in windowed borderless mode, then open up the Lossless Scaling app. When it starts, you'll want to leave scaling mode as auto and aspect ratio. Scaling type set to off. These first two options are the software's upscaler settings. For the most part, you won't use these as the built-in upscalers tend to be better, but if it doesn't have an upscaler, this is a cheap way to add one. So the area we want to focus on is the third column, frame generation. So you'll want to set this to LSFG 2.1, and then in mode, set it to X2, so ×2 mode. Make sure performance is ticked on. You can keep everything else off, except make sure you hit draw FPS so you can actually see your frame generation working in game. It'll show you what your actual frames and then your generated frames. This is super important to do, otherwise you will experience an unbearable amount of input lag. After you have all of that set up, click scale at the top. It'll start a timer. In that time, you have to select the window you want to run the frame generation on and wait. So you can see it timed out here, but within that time frame, select your game and just wait. Going back over to the game, in the top left of the screen, you will now see a set of numbers. This is how you know frame gen is active in your window. The first number indicates your actual frames and the second number indicates your generated frames. We're now hitting 90 plus FPS. Your actual frames do take a 5-ish FPS hit, but the result is a crazy smooth experience with little noticeable input lag in X2 mode with allow tearing switched on. My recommendation is to play the game for a bit and see what your actual average FPS is and lock your frame rate at or just below your average FPS. This way you're giving yourself as smooth of an experience as possible and taxing your budget system less.
Target eliminated. Justice served.
So we are shy of 165 frames per second though, so let's try X3 mode. As you can see, we take a maybe 1 to 2 more FPS hit, but we triple our overall frames to a whopping 130 to about 140 frames per second, and it is a buttery smooth experience while maintaining excellent visuals. I will say the input lag is a bit more noticeable now, but not bad at all as long as you have allow tearing switched on. Also turn on anti-lag and AMD Adrenaline to help with latency as well. Don't forget to lock your frames for even better experience, which I do to 40 frames per second so I get the smoothest frame time at a consistent 120 FPS. All that said, to make it really worth it, you have to have a monitor that can actually match the FPS you generate. You can still benefit though with a 60Hz monitor by increasing your game settings and running lossless scaling frame generation to hit that 60 FPS. In fact, let's try that out. So we've changed the render scale to ultra quality, turned object detail to high, put the lowest settings to low, and turned on anti-aliasing and running X2 frame generation, and it looks fantastic and plays really smooth, especially when we lock the FPS to 30 in game. I would be more than happy to run the game like this. Who would have thought that technology like this would exist that could make this GPU from 7 years ago more than viable in AAA games in 2024? It's nuts. Let's quickly check out some of the other top 50 games currently being played on Steam. So for Cyberpunk, we'll need FSR2 at quality to be able to get close to 60 FPS on low settings at 1080p. The change with ReShade here is more subtle, but in my opinion still looks better, but also takes a much larger hit to FPS. About 10 frames per second. Also, Relive recording hits this harder too, so real frames will be higher.
Never pay the price. Never catch my money. I'd rather die. If you think that you can stop me, I will be scared to fight. Bring it back, stop causing black out my eyes. I'm not stupid. It's just a bruise. I promise I won't stop until I'm black and blue. Black, blue, black, blue, black, black and blue. Black, blue, black, blue, black, black and blue.
Okay, so let's enable X2 mode. You can see we get 64-ish average FPS as indicated in the top left. You do get a bit of ghosting when riding around though, and you'll notice that the reticle also has some artifacting as well. That said, the game does still feel fairly smooth at the generated 60 plus frames per second. With X3 mode, it gets even smoother, hitting 90 plus FPS. Input lag is also fine, but you do get a bit more artifacting. You can see it especially when riding the motorcycle. Less evident in a car, but the ghosting is pretty obvious. In my opinion, worth it for the overall smoothness that you get.
When I was younger, man, I wish that I was light-skinned. Now I'm willing to trade the world for my skin. I surpass what you can do inside your lifespan. So just give me a little credit like a white man. That's good credit. My strength to meet my foe, peace, capiche, my peace on hold me up. She on the knees, the logo, I just need my dough. Masterpiece, my teeth, please. I'm 16 golden teeth, clean. Come fuck in my teeth.
Lastly, let's up the graphics to the highest we can do and still hit 60 FPS. So let's turn off upscaling and run the game at native 1080p with a mix of low to medium settings, ReShade off, and X2 frame gen.
Hey, that's what's up, keep it on the
Also lock the frames to 30 FPS in RTSS. As you can see, we get a solid 60 frames per second generated, and the frame time graph is really smooth. And I'm not switching between windows. I feel like this is probably what consoles do, and this is how they get that really smooth experience. But we're playing on medium to low settings, native 1080p resolution, guys. I gotta stress that. And it looks amazing and it feels great.
NCPD! Neutralize the suspect! Moving in! Line it up! Everyone down! Now!
Doctor Fleck!
NCPD, motherfuckers!
Surround the target.
She's almost down! Come on! Understood! Get on her! Go around! Keep fire! Bounce and pop ahead!
Another game that is currently in the top 50 most played games is Monster Hunter World, surprisingly. So we are running at 1080p TAA plus fxaa native, set overall image quality to high, ambient occlusion and volumetric rendering quality to mid, and everything else is at off or the lowest settings, and we get 60 plus frames per second here. Alright then, let's enable ReShade. I downloaded Leaf's colorful ReShade mod off of Nexus. This ReShade makes the game look less muddy looking and more vibrant overall. And we're still getting 55 plus frames per second. Did take a bit of a hit, but overall the visuals have much improved. With X2 mode enabled, we're hitting around 100 FPS and it feels like it. In X3 mode, we get 120 plus frames per second. I lock it to 40 FPS and look at the smoothness of that frame time graph. I play Monster Hunter with a controller and input lag is even less perceptible with it. It's practically non-existent. So we've now maxed out the settings and we're getting about 33 FPS. Gonna lock the frames here to 30 using RTSS so we can get a solid 60 FPS with a really smooth frame time. Next up, of the top 50 most played games right now, we have Witcher 3, Wild Hunt Next Gen. For the settings, we have FSR2 set to auto, dynamic resolution scaling is on, high sharpening, and everything else is going to be set to the low preset. And we're getting a pretty playable experience. We're getting 50 plus FPS, but we can make it look a lot better. So let's go ahead and turn on ReShade. I downloaded this preset off of Nexus, and you can see it almost applies an HD texture to it overall, so it looks a lot more detailed. The colors pop a bit more. We do take a bigger hit to the FPS because we are now sitting at around 45, 47 FPS. Let's go ahead and go back to no shade. You can see it's a bit more dull. But I mean, I guess that's kind of the feel that Witcher's trying to go for. But honestly, I don't know. I feel like it's not as good as the ReShade package that I used. So we're gonna go ahead and go back to that here. It's a bit drab. I'll kind of leave it so you can take a look. Especially look at the building and the tent there, as well as his armor and as well as Geralt's face. And when we enable it, everything just brightens up a bit more, has a bit more detail to it overall. So I'm okay with that little bit of FPS hit. Let's go ahead and turn on X2 frame generation. And just like that, we're getting 75 plus frames per second. Not much in terms of visual artifacting aside from the edge of the screen, but worth it for the smoothness that we're perceiving in game. Alright, let's enable X3 mode. So we're going to hit unscale it, X3, scale it again, select the game. And now that we're in X3 mode in that top left of the screen, you can see that we are getting 100 FPS. But as we move around here, we're probably averaging more like 90 plus FPS on the lower end, but still not too bad. This is definitely a high refresh rate experience. You do get a bit more of that noticeable artifacting at the bottom of the screen when moving, but I would be more than happy to play at this high frame rate. We can afford to improve the visual fidelity of the game here, so we're going to go into graphics and we're actually going to set it to high. So, yep, just confirm, yep, everything is set to high there. Make sure FSR2 is set to quality. And with the triple or the X3 mode for frame generation, we're still hitting 90 plus FPS with high settings. So the game visually looks better as we're playing at a higher settings, and we're still getting more than playable frames with this mod. But you do, I don't know if you can see when I moved around there, you do get some more artifacting around Geralt's head there when moving quickly in X3 mode. The visual artifacting is more prevalent. Let's go ahead and bring it back down to X2 frame generation mode. So we're at FSR2 quality with the high preset now. We're still getting 60 plus FPS.
Last chance to surrender unorthodox folks.
Especially. They just smear ash on their lips first. That's why it don't hurt. That's all it takes.
Right. What a freak.
No, 72. We can try it at home later.
What's where you stand?
Well, that's a pretty stable 60 FPS. Let's kick it up a notch. And we're gonna go ahead and set it to set the graphics to Ultra, the Ultra preset. Let the game's textures load in here. So we've upped the visual fidelity of the game, and we're still getting over 60 frames per second with the X2 frame generation mode enabled from Lossless Scaling.
It even sounds.
Let's go ahead and lock the frames to 30 in RTSS so we can get a smooth, fluid 60 frames per second. You're going to see here the frame time graph really smoothed out, and the game does feel quite nice to play like this. That frame time graph is very, very smooth, and this is going to make for a very nice 60 FPS experience, especially on a monitor that is only at 60 FPS.
Shut up and fight.
Next up, we have Starfield. While Starfield isn't in the top 50 games, it's one that is on the verge of unplayable for the RX 580 8GB 2048 SP. But I want to show you how to make this game playable and enjoyable in mid-2024. For the settings, we are running at 1080p low settings with FSR 3 enabled at 80% render scale.
That has played the settled systems for over 100 years.
We are getting 27-ish FPS in Mass District, one of the most graphically intensive areas in the game. Now, Starfield does come with FSR 3 frame generation, so you may be wondering why I don't enable it. Let me show you. When enabled, the frame time goes crazy, and while we are now getting 40 plus FPS, it is not a smooth experience. It's laggy and choppy, and honestly worse than when I had it less than 30 FPS with no frame generation. So we'll leave it off.
The reviews are in for the latest ships from Star Yard to
So let's turn on ReShade. So I downloaded Quantum ReShade off of Nexus, and look at that difference. The game looks so much better. ReShade does wonders here. It only takes about a 3 FPS hit.
to muscle out the farmers and claim that keep food tank afloat. Rangers apprehended Ronald, and during interrogation he admitted to his crime. The fate of the package for broadly the Freestar Collective is anyone's guess after this study turn of events. The Settled Systems News Network.
Okay, so we now have X2 Lossless Scaling frame generation enabled, and we're getting around 44 frames per second, but take a look at that frame time. Infinitely smoother than FSR 3's frame generation. With this game, you do get more obvious artifacting around your character, but if you're in first person mode, you obviously won't see that, and you don't really see that in the game as well. Everything looks quite nice still.
At the Galactic Banking Consortium, or GalBank. Again, the customer satisfaction survey of New Atlantis businesses ranked GalBank.
So with X3 mode enabled, you can see in the top left corner that we do get 60 plus FPS. Personally, I would lock the frames at 20 FPS to get a more fluid experience. Generally, you usually don't want to lock your frames under 30, but with this game I don't mind. It's not like it's a competitive shooter, it's an offline RPG. We do get more visual artifacting, especially around the character's model. Like in third person, you can see when you move the cursor, the head kind of glitches out, but then also the character sometimes does as well. However, this is a small price to pay to get actually playable frames in this game with this hardware. I should note that FSR 3.1 is supposed to be coming out for Starfield, and hopefully the frame generation will be fixed with that iteration. It should be way better than it is, honestly, since it should have access to the game's motion vectors, and it would be way more smooth with less visible artifacting than the lossless scaling frame generation. It does work better on higher end hardware, but with the RX 580 there may be some limitation with that, and that's why it's not working as well as it should be. Last clip we have here is the optimal settings I've found for this configuration. We have 1080p FSR3 enabled and 80% render scale on the low preset with the HD ReShade enabled. We have the frame locked to 20, and we're getting a stable 60 FPS with X3 lossless scaling frame generation enabled.
I cannot, will not be updated.
Lossless scaling is an awesome tool to breathe life into old hardware. It's not perfect, but the technology is amazing, and it allows people who can't afford to buy the highest spec components to enjoy games that otherwise would be locked behind a performance wall. And as a hidden gem, it upscales videos from your favorite streaming platforms if your monitor supports it. Give it a try. I can even get some 60 FPS YouTube videos all the way to 180 frames per second. It's nuts. That about wraps it up. I will include links for some of the parts used in today's build in the description below. They are affiliate links, but they will add no extra cost to you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.